everybody, I'm here with a video about the astrology for March of 2025. It's going to be a wild ride. I'm not going to lie about that. It is going to be a wild ride along with April. I think that, we can all see that there's a lot of shifts and changes going on in the world. I am going to say, I'm going to talk about the headlines for the month of March, and I am not shy about my politics or my political bent, and I know not everybody's going to agree with that, and that's okay. But I am going to talk about that a little bit in the context of the astrology for the month of March 2025. If you want something that's a little bit more neutral, I do have a newsletter that you can get on my website free. It's a monthly newsletter that I do where I talk about all of the major transits, the headlines for the month, and I talk about them more on a level of like a little bit of mundane astrology, but also just how it might affect you more on a personal level. So if you want that, you can definitely check that out. The link to my website is down below, so I'm plugging that. But it's a wild month that we have coming up. And so if you thought January and February were wild, and they definitely were, hold on now. I'm Canadian. I'm from Canada here, and it's been weird, I have to tell you. To have like our neighbors next door, the United States, threatening us with annexation has been nerve-wracking and terrible, and it's something that I never thought we'd experience, but here we are. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, Trump is just bluffing and he's just saying that. But he's also said a lot of other things that people have gone, he won't do that, and he's doing them. So, you never know. He's very erratic, what's real and what's not. But it is like a threat to our national sovereignty. So I do want to make it very clear for any Americans that are watching here that Canadians are not angry at Americans. We know most Americans do not agree with this. I mean, some do, but we know that most of you don't agree with this, and we're not angry at you. We're angry at the big orange bully in office right now. That's who we're angry at. So when you hear us, if you hear us boo the anthem at hockey games, it isn't because we don't like you. We love you, but we don't love being threatened. We don't love our country being threatened with annexation. So, and just so you know, Canada does not want to be a 51st state. We have no intention of that. You would be really hard pressed to find a Canadian who was like pro that. I'm sure there might be the odd person out there, but no. Just for the record, we have no intention of being the United States. So it's been weird. I wonder if part of this is the Pluto return of the United States. So if you look at the chart for the United States from the Declaration of Independence, when that was signed, a lot of people use that as the birth chart for the United States of America. Pluto takes 248 years to go all the way around the zodiac, and so we are now at the return of Pluto, where Pluto was when the United States was being formed as the country that it is today, right? So 250 years is a long time, and it's also been noted that 250 years is also roughly the time frame historically that a lot of empires fall and or change drastically. So 250 years into sort of the Roman Empire was when it went from being it wasn't really a democracy, but a democracy in that, those who had land and had power could vote, men, of course, to being run by dictators. That doesn't mean, that that's necessarily the fate of the United States, but it's interesting to note that that was a shift that happened in the Roman Empire. We've also seen, shifts in government. If you look at Britain, for example, roughly every 250 years undergoes a shift and a change with, their governmental processes. So there is like a cycle of countries, sort of things changing and power dynamics when they reach that Pluto return. So, it's interesting to see that all of this stuff is kind of going on right now in the United States. Now, what the outcome is going to be, who knows, right? But, I'm hoping that it's, that this is sort of a wake-up call for people in the United States, that you can't take your democracy for granted. and that, maybe that the oligarchs have too much power. Maybe the tech bros have too much power. Maybe the Christian nationalists have too much power, and people need to fight against that and to, fight for their freedoms rather than, having bullies kind of in power and in charge of things. But I really think that that's probably part of the Pluto return. Now, we also just came out of a Mars retrograde. So Mars goes retrograde, I think it's about roughly every 2 years or so. Mercury retrogrades, people are a lot more familiar with that. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks each, so it's not that unusual. Mars retrogrades, again, it's roughly about every 2 years or so. This one was in the sign of Cancer. It started in Leo on December 6th. And interestingly, that's around the time where you had that shooting of that CEO for United Healthcare happened around that time. And then Mars went backwards through Leo and crossed back into the sign of Cancer. And then he stopped at 17 degrees Cancer and is now starting to move forward again. And Mars retrogrades have often been times of frustration, have been times where we've seen there's been a step backwards that's been taken. But now Mars is starting to move forward, and often there are consequences for actions that happen during the Mars retrograde that start to come when Mars starts to move forward, start to play out. And so it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, especially when you have had sort of these unprecedented kind of overstepping of power. You've had the executive branch in the United States not listening to Congress, who according to the Constitution controls the purse strings, but the executive is overriding that. So it'll be interesting to see are they going to listen to the courts. We're seeing a lot of power dynamics shifting in that area. So it's interesting. We'll see what kind of happens there. It was interesting, the image of someone was commenting on this. So I did not come up with this. So about Elon Musk standing there with a chainsaw on stage bragging about all the cuts he's doing, like cutting whole government departments and hundreds, probably even thousands of employees, and literally taking money from like the poorest people, like US aid, which feeds some of the poorest, most desperate people in the world, taking money from that to fund tax cuts for billionaires. And he's standing there with glee with a chainsaw. And so Mars, has the imagery of knives, right? Knives and cutting things. And then you have, it's in Cancer, and Cancer is about nurturing and protecting things, and it's about mothering and children, and how it's literally like cutting off, support for some of the poorest people. And he's like very proud of that, right? So that was really very interesting. An astrologer was commenting on the imagery of that, and I thought that was very interesting as well, an interesting observation for sure. So that's kind of the energy as we walk into Mars. So it's already kind of crazy, but I'll go through what the headlines are. So first off, we start on March 1st with a Venus retrograde in the sign of Aries. So it starts on March 1st at 10 degrees of Aries, and then Venus will go back to 24 degrees of Pisces on April 12th. And that's when the Venus retrograde will end. She'll start moving forward again. So Venus retrogrades are often coincide with periods of protest or like protest type movements. And Venus, represents the feminine, obviously. And in Aries, it's the angry feminine. So Venus repeats the sign that it retrogrades in every 8 years. And so Venus, last time Venus was in retrograde was in 2017. And that's when we had the Women's March and a lot of the movement around that. Previous Venus retrogrades have also coincided with protests around women's rights, trying to advance women's rights. And so we may see a lot of angry women over the next month or so, or people angry about, civil rights being taken away, or wanting things to be protected during this time. Because Aries is a sign that's ruled by Mars, and it's a sign of a warrior. And so we have the feminine in the sign of the warrior at this time. So I think it'll be interesting to see. There'll probably be some protests and things that are going on over this month. Venus retrogrades on a personal level tend to be times where we are reassessing our aesthetics. We're also reassessing our relationships. This can be a time where if a relationship is on the rocks or it's not on good footing, they may break up. If your relationship is strong, you don't need to worry, because it'll be fine, right? But it's also a time where we just reassess sometimes the dynamics in our relationships, not just romantic, but also friendships, family dynamics, things like that. And it has a connection with aesthetics because Venus is about beauty, and often retro styles come up during a Venus retrograde. But also, a classic piece of advice for Venus retrograde is don't drastically change your look. It's okay to experiment with things, but don't cut your hair off, don't get a tattoo, any of those things, because you probably won't like it once the retrograde's done. Another classic piece of advice is not to take your ex back. Sometimes though, people need to do that to figure out why that person like was an ex in the first place. But it's a time where sometimes old lovers or old friends come back to us, not necessarily in a bad way. Sometimes it's just to check in and say, hey, but we do have some of the past returning to us relationship wise. The next headline we have is that on March 3rd, we have Mercury go into the sign of Aries. So Mercury is travel and communication, and when he's in the sign of Aries, he's very feisty. So it can be really great if we are looking to assert ourselves, if we're looking to speak up and speak out, especially, if you're looking at speaking out about politics. It's a great, like we're very direct. The only problem I think with Mercury in the sign of Aries is sometimes he's too blunt, he's too aggressive, doesn't always think about other people's feelings. This is also really great for short trips as well because of Mercury also rules travel. And it has that quick, kind of fast, feisty energy as an association with like fast cars and things that go zoom. So also be careful, when you're driving, things like that. So I do see that both the energy of both Venus and Mercury in that sign of Aries, there's a lot of feisty energy going on as we get like start of this month. Our next headline is on March 13th. We have eclipses this month as well. So not only do we have Venus retrograde and later a Mercury retrograde, we also have eclipses going on. So on March 13th, we have a full moon at 23 degrees of Virgo, and this is going to be a lunar eclipse. So that's when there's a shadow cast over the moon. Often it's called a blood moon. It looks like the moon is red, and it is a total lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo. So if you know your birth chart, if you have a lot of Virgo placements or you have planets around 23 degrees of any of the signs, you might feel this more than other people. Eclipses are times of beginnings and endings. They often are times of, like big shifts in the world, things that, end and suddenly begin. We're also shifting the axis on which the eclipses are on. So the past year and a half, the eclipses have been occurring in the signs of Aries and Libra. They're always in pairs and opposite signs. And slowly they move into the next set of pairs. So they are now crossing over into that Virgo Pisces axis, but there's still like a little back and forth between them for this year, and then they'll be fully in that Virgo and Pisces axis. So this is the start of a new eclipse cycle, so we may see some really big shifts going on. Lunar eclipses I find often reveal things that were hidden, things that were kind of in the dark, things that people didn't want to know. They start to come out. Now Virgo tends to rule things like health, the health services. It reveals it's agriculture, it's food. It's often about working people as well. So there's going to be a bunch of information that comes up around this. Not terribly surprised with what's going on right now in the world, especially United States, but it's going to show that there's going to be some information that comes out in this area that was kind of hidden that people didn't know about, that kind of shakes things up. Now, in your own life, look at the Virgo house in your chart to know where there may be some information that comes out. Again, it depends what your personal chart is like. Some eclipses go by and you may feel nothing. Other times it's like, whoa, a lot of things are going on. Now, to add to the drama, the next day, March 14th, Mercury retrograde in Aries starts. So this goes from 9 degrees of Aries to back to 26 degrees of Pisces, and it's April 7th. So we have this overlap of both the Venus and the Mercury retrograde in the same sign this month. So this is not a month to like start something new. This is about reassessing things, reviewing things. I feel like there's going to be information that comes out that really causes people to review and reassess things on a lot of different levels this month. It's quite a shift that's going on. I really feel like there's hidden information that's going to be revealed to us this month. It's really going to make us reassess things and reevaluate things about where we stand about stuff. And I think it's going to be interesting. Let's just put it that way. Mercury retrograde classic advice is, don't start something new. This is not the time to sign a contract. I mean, sometimes you have to, right? But if you do, just make sure you go over all the fine print so that you know what you're signing up for. Don't sign it with any haste, because it'll come back to you. But just, be extra careful. Make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. It's not the end of the world. Mercury retrograde also, like, communication breakdowns, and in the sign of Aries, this can be misunderstandings around bluntness, or feeling like somebody, maybe has attacked you in some way when they haven't. There can be misunderstandings around that, people losing their temper. So be patient with yourself and with others. Also, because Mercury in the sign of Aries can be quite, like, zoomy and fast, watch for, like, don't drive too fast in your car. Make sure that you're not rushing places. Like, there's more chance of an accident if you're rushing during this time. March 20th, the next headline is the sun moves into the sign of Aries. This is the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, and the fall equinox in the southern hemisphere. So sun moving into Aries moves into this sign around this time every year. The spring equinox is often seen as new beginnings. Some people see it as a kind of pagan new year. It's the astrological new year, and some people will even take the moment of the spring equinox as they'll look at the chart as being something that tells you about how the year is going to go for your area, for the rest of the year. So that's what some people do. Sun in Aries, though, tends to turn our focus away from the Piscean, which is more about the spiritual world and the collective, more towards ourselves as an individual. It's also a good time where we feel like we want to start new things. It's a time where we feel, definitely feel an energy boost. I think especially here in the northern hemisphere when it's been dark, it's getting lighter. We now have more, now after the equinox, we'll have more hours of light than dark. So there's a real sense of, there's a more outward focus as opposed to the internal focus of the dark half of the year. It's a good time for new beginnings, for self-development. It's a good time to, like, put yourself out there, try something new, do something different, be more assertive. It has that kind of quality, that energy to it. On March 27th, Venus retrogrades back into the sign of Pisces. And then on March 29th, Mercury also retrogrades back into the sign of Pisces. So we have a shift from that Venus being in Aries energy into Venus in Pisces for the retrograde. So Venus is technically happier in Pisces than she is in Aries. So we go from kind of that angry energy to sort of this more in retrograde, this more reflective type energy, also like wanting to put beauty into the spiritual. Venus in the sign of Pisces tends to be quite creative, tends to be, very spiritually focused as well. This is, loves poetry and music and film. And so we actually might see some art that comes out that kind of is, again, because Venus retrogrades do often align with protests, we might see a more creative or artistic component coming to this. This also, too, in our own personal lives, we may be not as feeling as aggressive about like reviewing our relationships or like confronting. It's more about like this inner sort of work and thing that we're looking at doing on ourselves. And then when Mercury retrograde moves back into Pisces, some of the things that change are there may be, instead of there being misunderstandings based on like someone losing their temper or being too blunt, it's like we're feeling confused about things, or that things aren't clear. There's a sense of muddiness, like we're not seeing the whole information. Disinformation and misinformation could be quite prominent during the next couple of weeks with Mercury in Pisces in retrograde. So just think to watch for that. And then on March 29th, we have a new moon, which is again another eclipse. It's a solar eclipse. So this is when the shadow of the earth goes over the sun. It's a partial eclipse. I think it's going to be just visible from what I've seen. I think it's like in the northern regions. I don't think it's visible here. It's at 9 degrees of Aries. And so eclipses, this is the last one in Aries. before again it fully shifts over to that Pisces Virgo axis. But this particular new moon, it's solar eclipse, and so this is beginnings and endings. And I think particularly some of the information that we're going to find out around the lunar eclipse that happens on the 13th is going to lead to some shifts and changes going on later in the month. And again, beginnings and endings. And depending again on your chart, some people will feel this, something won't, some people won't. Now, eclipse season, a lot of people say it's not just, you know, the day of the eclipse. It's not even just the time between the two eclipses. It can start a week or two before the eclipse and a week or two after. So really, all of March is kind of colored by these eclipses, this information being revealed, these beginnings and endings, a lot of things in those areas. Now, the solar eclipse is in the sign of Aries, and Aries is a sign, again, of the warrior, of our sense of self. It's a sign of like the individual. And so there may be some big changes and shakeups. I think maybe on a political level, there may be some things potentially going on with the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, hopefully for the better for everybody. But there is, you know, because it's that warrior energy, there may be some things around wars or conflicts in the world. But in our own lives, you know, any conflicts that we've been having over the past year and a half, you may see some things that start to wrap up around this time. And then this is one of the big headlines for the year. We have Neptune moving into the sign of Aries. And he goes in there, but he retrogrades back into Pisces on October 22nd later this year. So this is a preview. So from now until October, watch some of the themes that come up in the world, because we're going to be seeing those things as we move forward into 2026, because Neptune will move into Aries permanently, like for the next 14 years or so in 2026. So this is kind of like the trailer. This is showing us some of the things that are going to be coming up. Now, Neptune rules spirituality, also imagination, and often the sign that Neptune's in shows us the ideals of the particular era. So we've had Neptune in the sign of Pisces since 2012. And that's really the era of like where social media just really exploded, the smartphone exploded. And Pisces is all about connection and removing barriers and feeling a sense of oneness. And I mean, social media certainly helped us to connect with people all over the world, right? But Pisces can also be a sign of a lot of illusion. And so, you know, we only saw the highlight reel. So we were thinking, oh, this person's life is perfect, but it may not be perfect at all. Again, it's that illusion, that sense of like, you know, this is also the era of like misinformation and disinformation and fake news and conspiracies and all of those kind of things, where people didn't really know what the truth of things was anymore. Also heard somebody describe the era of Neptune and Pisces as sort of the era of like, you know, of the woke era, where it was like, you know, there was this Piscean ideal of like oneness and us all being spiritually connected and wanting everyone to be, you know, treated, you know, fairly and with dignity, which of course is a good thing, right? But then sometimes it crossed over into like way too much, where people became obsessed with like identity politics and actually ended up separating people more than bringing them together sometimes. And so, you know, whenever like the Neptune sign sets a tone collectively for what becomes the ideal. But often what happens is, you know, the ideal is a fantasy. It's not real, right? Or it's not, you know, it doesn't take into account nuances. And so sometimes it ends up going too far, and then people become disillusioned, and then the next sign kicks over. And so now we're going into Aries. And Aries, we go from like sort of this emphasis on the collective. And you see this in things like, you know, talking about systemic problems and things like that. It's going to be more about the individual and individual responsibility. And again, it's like that can be a good thing, but sometimes it goes too far, where we don't take into account the structures that exist that like hold people back, right? So it's always a balance, right? But Neptune and Aries, I can see it being a time where it's really idealizing the masculine, idealizing the image of the warrior, idealizing the image of the hero and the pioneer. The last time that Neptune was in the sign of Aries was back in the 1860s, and that's when you had like in the States the Civil War. You also had things like the Crimean War and things, where it became the emphasis was like on the brave soldier, but also like the cowboy, you know, conquering the West, right? the pioneer, all of that. So this emphasis on like being the first to do something or going, into uncharted territory. This may be a time too where we may see things like missions to Mars come up over the next 14 years. Neptune, though, also is it's about the ocean. And some people have surmised that Aries, being in the sign of Aries, might be about the oceans warming up because Aries is ruled by Mars. Also naval warfare. People are worried about things like China and Taiwan. So, I mean, I'm not saying this scare anybody, but these are all possible ways that some of these archetypal energies can play out, like in the wider world. In our own lives, you may look at your Aries house and watch what happens from April to October 22nd, because this is kind of a preview of some of the themes you're going to be dealing with in that part of your chart over the next 14 years. Neptune is about spirituality and oneness. It has a sense of creativity to it too. So again, that's a very positive side of it, but it also can be about confusion and fantasy. It does have a connection with addictions as well, because addictions just like things like drugs and alcohol dissolve barriers. So there may be a lot of, just I think that some of the things that may come up is, this idea of we have to do things by ourselves rather than looking to others to help us, which is not necessarily a good thing, right? Or this fantasy of having to, being the solitary person who does everything by themselves and doesn't need help from everyone. And I think that that can be a negative thing. So I think there's a few ways that it can play out. I guess we'll see what comes up, but that is a major shift that's happening in the psyche of the collective. That's going to be happening at the end of March, and we're kind of building up towards there. So if you sat through all of this with me, thank you. Again, if you want, I do have a newsletter detailing all the headlines for the month that you can sign up for free on my website. I also have on my Patreon detailed weekly astro reports. If you want to know what's going on week by week, you can definitely come and check that out. I also do astrology readings. You can check out on my Etsy shop. But things are changing and shifting, and I feel like every day brings a new surprise. I hope wherever you are in the world, you're doing okay. Yeah, yesterday I saw that whole, like, as I'm filming this is March 1st. I saw that interview in the Oval Office with Zelensky, and I just was appalled. I felt so terrible for him and so terrible for the people of Ukraine, and appalled, and I've never seen anything like it before. Yeah, it's shameful, so shameful. I'm sending my love to wherever you are in the world. I know if you're watching this channel, you probably have pretty similar politics to me, but I'm just hoping wherever you are in the world, you're safe and everything is okay. And as always, I'm sending you peace and love and light.